This is Pauline Jennings, and you're listening to the second of a 2-episode double-hitter Christmas Musician Talk special, featuring last week Professor Stephen Amundsen, and today is an extended interview with Dr. Anton Armstrong, a treasure to so many at St. Olaf, this community, and far beyond. As I said last week, my usual bumper music doesn't quite work for this special. So, yep, that's better. This is the St. Olaf Choir singing Go Tell It on the Mountain. As I said, my guest this week is Dr. Anton Armstrong, who became the fourth conductor of the St. Olaf Choir in 1990 after 10 years in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he served on the faculty of Calvin College. He is a graduate of St. Olaf College and earned a master's degree at the University of Illinois and doctorate at Michigan State University. Dr. Armstrong has been selected as a guest conductor and lecturer for countless and prestigious national and international choirs and groups. Since 1990, Dr. Armstrong has served as artistic director of the St. Olaf Christmas Festival, one of the oldest music celebrations of Christmas in the United States, begun in 1912 by F. Milius Christiansen, founder of the St. Olaf College Music Department. The Christmas Festival features nearly 600 student musicians who are members of 5 St. Olaf choral ensembles and the St. Olaf Orchestra. He has received many distinguished awards, including the Robert Foster Cherry Award for Great Teaching, the Distinguished Alumni Award from the American Boychoir School, the Distinguished Alumni Award from Michigan State University, and received the Saltzman Award from the Oregon Bach Festival, the festival's highest honor. As you will hear, in the fall of 2014, the St. Olaf Choir and Dr. Armstrong received a Regional Emmy for the PBS television program Christmas in Norway with the St. Olaf Choir. There is so much more he has to share with us, so let's talk to Dr. Anton Armstrong. Hello and welcome, Anton. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you on Musician Talk.
Thanks, Pauline. It's a delight to be with you today.
Oh, thank you. Now, COVID has been devastating to so many musicians, and there's been so many disappointments with this. And one of those great disappointments has been the cancellation of the St. Olaf Christmas Festival, which you are the artistic director of. This has never happened before, right?
Well, actually, one other time, as I found out, as I was wondering how they handled things in the past. So I actually went to the history of the college that was written by Professor Emeritus of Religion, Joseph Shaw, who also served as a college historian for many, many years, and he can get me later for telling his age, but at 92, he's still thriving. I just passed him the other day, taking his constitutional walk.
Nice.
But in Joe's book written at the time of the centennial of the college, which was in 1974, which was my freshman year at St. Olaf, he wrote that in 1918, because of the Spanish flu epidemic, they actually had to cancel the festival at the last minute. So they actually made it through November. They had some cases. College at that time had been used also as a site for some training for military. And several young men seemed to have come down with the Spanish flu. But the minute it hit a female student, they threw everybody off the campus.
Oh, really?
And that was in November of 1918. And so the Christmas festival had been scheduled and had been, I think, planned for and had actually been in preparation.
Wow.
Had to be stopped, and they removed all the students from campus. So it's been these two epidemics that have interrupted the flow since 1912 of this program. Neither one of the world wars, another civil rights, none of the other things. These two pan-epidemics have put a halt to this festival.
And what a disappointment that is, and I'm sure so much for you. I'm curious as to what changes you've had to make to hold choir rehearsals at St. Olaf.
Well, I tell you, the last 8 months have felt like 80 years at times. First of all, when it finally hit, we were suddenly dispersed from campus between March 16th and March 18th. We completed the semester remotely, and the St. Olaf Choir did engage in 2 virtual choir projects. One I was very much aware of because we wanted to at least in honor and celebrate the seniors who were graduating and could not conclude that year. We did a virtual recording of Beautiful Savior, the St. Olaf Choir signature piece, as arranged by the founder, Chris Johnson. And I had two wonderful soloists alternating the solo through the year. So we divided the solo up in half, so they both were featured on this. And that was a wonderful event. And it was a great gift to all of us to be able to at least sing one more time together. However, the current manager of the St. Olaf Choir, our director of music organizations, Jean Parrish, who is a 1988 grad of St. Olaf and went on to a wonderful career as an arts administrator. And right before she came to St. Olaf in 2015, when B.J. Johnson retired, she was the general manager of the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. Well, she actually surprised me because the 2019 and the 2020 school year marked my 30th year on the faculty and as conductor of the St. Olaf Choir.
Congratulations.
And so it started off as we were about to go on tour, and I came up to board the buses, that I met a bus, two buses in fact, that were totally covered in, they wrapped the buses. And the first bus was great. It was a picture of the choir, the one that we often use on the concert tour program. And then as I saw the second bus, my jaw dropped open because it was a huge picture of me. For 37 years, Robert Johnson, we called him lovingly BJ, was the manager of music organizations. Now, BJ thought big. And this certainly was a chapter out of one of BJ's books. I'm sure many of your listeners will know that we lost him last year, in 2019, to a very aggressive case of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. My older brother has moved to Northfield 3 years ago, and he was driving me out to campus. He simply said to Gene, "I'm glad it's you that has to deal with him with that big head on the bus for the next 2 weeks." And I thought you really had got me then, because I'm pretty good about finding out things, and it's hard for people to keep secrets from me. But the second one she did, which is even more touching, was that she and I were scheduled to have a Zoom conversation in June with my current colleague, Tessa Monamontague, who conducts the Viking Chorus and the Chapel Choir. And I thought we had agreed to a 2:00 time on a Sunday, and that Tessa would show up a little bit before that. And at one point he had suggested in an early communication between the three of us, I'll just come over to your house. That way we don't have to have a three-way conversation going. And I'll get over there around 1:30. And I had responded, no reason to come over at 1:30 if we're not talking until 2. I'll see you about 1 to 2. And it was a Sunday, and I'll be honest, I had spent most of the day in my pajamas. I didn't go to church. There was no church to go to. Anyway, and at about 1:25, I thought, you should get yourself cleaned up. So I was about to shave, I was about to jump in the shower, and my phone goes off, and it's my landline. And these days I don't often answer my landline, but something said, answer the landline. I put my robe on, went to the phone, and it was Tessa. And I said, you're not supposed to be here for like another 20, 25 minutes. I'm here, let me in. And I have to buzz him into my condo building. So he comes up, and I said, Tessa, well, sit here. I need to just get in the shower. Let me get in the shower, and then we can take care of the call with Jean. Well, he then says, and it seems a little strange to me, but he then says, no, she's waiting for a call right now. I said, I look atrocious. He said, just get on the thing. And we conclude our business in about 6 or 7 minutes, and I'm going, well, why did we even have to have this call? She never told me what the purpose of the call was for. I was so clueless. And at the same time, I get another call on the landline, and I ignore it, because normally these days it's telemarketers or somebody at that time looking for political donations.
Exactly.
And he said, aren't you going to answer your phone? And I said, no. After 4 rings, it will stop. Which you did. And then like 30 seconds later, it happened again. I thought, well, what is this? So I went to answer the phone. And all of a sudden, it's my college roommate and his wife. We were all in the St. Olaf Choir together. Well, they were in my lobby. So I said, come on up. I'm on a Zoom call. Come on up. I look a message, just come on up. And they came in, and they were carrying 2 big packages. I'm going, what is this? And they sat down and with masks on, and I'm still not totally figuring this out. Cut to the chase. All of a sudden, Gene says to Tessa, I think we should do this now. I'm going, what are you all talking about? And he presses a button on the computer, and the next thing I see is the St. Olaf Choir. The whole St. Olaf Choir. And then I look further and I see my dear, dear friend Andre Thomas and his wife Portia.
Oh.
And then a couple of other of my colleagues, James Bob and Therese Hibbert, all show up on this call.
Wow.
What's going on? The plan had been originally to surprise me the first Sunday in May when the St. Olaf Choir would have sung in chapel. And that afternoon, they were going to have a special banquet for me honoring the 30th anniversary. But the surprise was they were going to, TESPA was going to teach the St. Olaf Choir this piece. And Andre and his wife were to fly up from Florida. And the kids were going to surprise me. My other colleagues knew about it. And, you know, they had this all planned. And when we obviously were dispersed and they couldn't do that, at one point, Jean said, well, maybe we should just put this off. And Andre said, no, let's figure out how to do this. With Tessa's help, because he's such a tech guru, they figured out how to do this virtually, kept me totally out of the loop. So Andre is at the piano. He's a consummate pianist as well. Tessa is the tenor soloist, gorgeous voice. And the choir prepared this as a virtual gift. And I was really in the midst of starting to really deal with some depression, you know? Everything that I had expected to do and everything that kind of gave me joy had been taken away from me, the making of music. And though I keep kind of sometimes terribly busy, that's what energizes me. And all of the things that energize me, I was supposed to be conducting in England at a choral festival in Cambridge in August and returning to New Zealand for a conference.
Wow.
All of that had been taken away. I couldn't say goodbye to my seniors. Every year we sing for baccalaureate, and the last thing I said, don't leave this room before you say goodbye to me. I was kind of feeling sorry for myself that day. And I looked a fright in a bathrobe. I think I'd shaved at least. My hair was all over the place because I hadn't had a haircut at that point in 2 months. And I looked like Bozo the Clown because I had not been able to wet it down or anything. But I sat there and I cried near the end. I fell apart. And part of it was the beauty of the piece, but also thinking all of this love, of the extra effort it takes. Virtual choirs seem like a great thing to do. And, you know, it is one way of making music, but it's very artificial. You're singing your part into a microphone, nobody else to share that music with. You know, the final product might have some meaning, but the process, and one of the things I learned from your father-in-law, from my predecessor, Ken Jennings, was process is as important, if maybe even more important as an educator than the final product.
Right. And
I had lost the ability to make that and experience that process with these kids. So it's a wonderful gift. And I know this is a long digression in one way, but it speaks to then my determination with my colleagues to make sure if there was any way possible we could make music in person, we would. We spent 2.5 hours one day early in June measuring out the spaces where we thought we could rehearse with choirs. Tessa is a tech guru, as I said, so he had a little app on his phone. He was measuring out that way. And Teresa and I were doing it the old-fashioned way with tape measures. But that's at a time when we thought we could be 6 feet apart. We wrote up a bunch of reports for the administration so they could start making plans. And the college made a very brave, and I think, as we are seeing now, a very wise decision that we would start classes 3 weeks early, proceed without a fall break, which was very difficult on us, but proceed all the way to Thanksgiving and then end the semester there, hoping we could avoid the confluence of the onset of flu season and possible resurgence of COVID-19. And we did. We made it through. Just barely, but we made it through. But 3 days before we were to start classes in August, well, several weeks before that, we had some new evidence, and our new department chair said, I think it's not safe to just be 6 feet apart. She was looking at further studies that were coming out of Europe. And so it was decided that all singers and brass and wind instruments would have to be 9 feet apart.
Wow.
So that adjusted all those numbers that we had worked so hard in June to acquire. And then 3 days before the start of school, we brought a wonderful new epidemiologist, Ben Miller, who happens to live here in Northfield. Ben informed us, after going through with our physical plant facilities people, that our air system, the airflow system, was not meeting COVID-19 specs.
Oh, how disappointing. Oh.
And basically none of our rehearsal spaces in Chris Johnson Hall of Music could be used.
Oh, no.
The space where I thought I might be able to put the single choir at 6 feet apart, but I could get them barely in at 6 feet apart into the Ernest Recital Hall. Well, at this point, the air vac system was, and the test on that was saying that you could have no more than 4 to 6 people singing in a
Oh.
room that normally we would, jam, but we jammed 450 people in that room to do Christmas Festival mass choir rehearsal. My normal rehearsal room to sing Olaf Choir, Boston Hall, 4 people. So the
4.
only 2 spaces at 4, because
Oh,
the air vac system just wasn't. And the problem is that building was built when they broke ground. My freshman day as a student here at St. Olaf in 1974, and we moved into that building in 1976. And it was created with, environmental concerns of the time, but it is hermetically sealed. There's not one window that opens. So after the college's additional study, it was determined that we can only basically have maybe 3 spaces that could really, 3, maybe 4 spaces that could accommodate choral singing. So when we started the classes on August 20th, for the first 2 weeks, we were all remote until we were all tested and can prove that we, were negative to meet in person. So normally, the single choir rehearses the most of any ensemble. And normally I have 90 minutes, 5 days a week with them. Well, then I was cut down to no more than 30 minutes a day. And because of COVID restrictions, I could not see more than 47 to 50 of the students at one time.
wow.
So I had to conduct the single choir in 2 subsets, as did most of my rest of my colleagues. And finally, the weekend of October 30th through November 1st, we tried to record the pieces we had learned in that time period. The choral groups did not meet as a whole until the day we recorded on either October 30th, 31st, or 1st, and I had 1 half an hour. We each had a half an hour to put our subsets together as one whole group and then rehearse, clear the room for 30 minutes for air refreshment, and then record.
Wow.
They did it. I can only speak to the 2 sessions I did with the choirs that I conduct. They were amazing. So what we recorded really was what we studied for this semester, but it was never to be something we were going to use as part of Christmas. Originally, we thought we were going to do that. And then when they told us we couldn't even bring our ensembles together as whole ensembles, we just said,
No,
we're not going to do that.
can't do it.
So what it is at least it is a recorded evidence that we were able to make music in this fall 2020. But the Christmas program that I curated and that was originally shown on Sunday, December 6th, but is now available in archival stream by going to the college's webpage. I drew from past Christmas festivals, and for this one at least, I drew from Christmas festivals either that were streamed in the last 4 years, or before that when we had video coverage from years when we filmed for PBS broadcast.
Got it.
And I primarily drew from the last 4 years primarily, so that current students, all but our first year students, might see themselves in one shape or another on that. And that happens a great deal. But I also chose to bring back some pieces and some conductors from the past. So especially 2 of my retired colleagues who are still living here in very, very good health are Sigrid Johnson and John Ferguson. And I drew from our centennial video, John conducting his orchestrated version of O Come All Ye Faithful and his arrangement of that. And Sigrid conducting, I think, one of the beloved pieces, especially of older alumni of FAM's Chris Johnson, his Lullaby on Christmas Eve, which we did with the whole mass choir. One other colleague of mine who was also my teacher as well, and I sang with him for 2 years in chapel choir before I sang in the single choir under Ken Jennings, is Robert Schultz. And as many of your listeners might know, Bob has been battling Parkinson's disease, and it is in its final stages now. And one of the pieces that he created for Christmas Festival in 1993, we premiered in 1994 for the first time, was a setting of his Nocturne. And it's become one of the favorite pieces we do right before we sing Beautiful Savior at the end of these Christmas Festival concerts. And I was able to find a video recording of him conducting that from 1997.
Oh, how wonderful.
And I think the joy and the grace that I hope it will bring and comfort will bring his family as they walk these final steps of his journey. And for so many of us who were influenced by him, he was one of the most pastoral of all of my colleagues. And has been like a musical godfather to me since I was 18, since I first came here. And I hope we'll bring back many happy memories of that time at St. Olaf with him and what he gave and has given to this community. And finally, part of this program was shaped, yes, acknowledging the pandemic of COVID, but knowing that, hopefully we do now see light at the end of the tunnel, that there, will be vaccines forthcoming. And that, I have every desire and hope that people will actually take these vaccines so that we can actually meet in person next year.
Yes.
And you and I don't have to have this type of conversation then.
Right.
But I wanted to also address in a more subtle way, and I say it in some opening comments that I make at the beginning of this concert, that we were just not fighting the pandemic of COVID-19, which does have the promise of a vaccine. But we have another pandemic in this country that doesn't have a vaccine, and that is one of racism.
Yes.
And I wanted to address that in the fact that, yes, while we've, over the years, St. Olaf has been celebrated and we have honored the heritage of this school and its roots from Norway, and has been very much evident in the musical selections, we have also diversified over the years, not only in terms of our population of students and faculty and staff who represent Black and Indigenous and other people of color, but we've done so in the multicultural programming, and that had happened before I came. So I have a clip in there. We have a video of Kenneth Jennings conducting the St. Olaf Choir in his last Christmas Festival in 1989, doing a beautiful Spanish carol arranged by Alice Parker and Robert Shaw. One reviewer said this years ago about Kenneth. He had this sixth sense of rhythm. And you see it in his body because he's just dancing with it. It's just elegant as his hands were. Many of us who have sung under him. Yes. You can always hear Ken in rehearsals. He was very soft-spoken. But you just watched his eyes and you watched his hands.
Oh,
and those hands were magical.
Yes.
And you see that in this recording. It was wonderful to put this program together. And it allowed me to be able to say, yes, we are celebrating the rich heritage of the school, but that heritage is also broadened out in a much more global sense.
And just to repeat where people can see this.
St. Olaf website, and if you look under Christmas at St. Olaf, if you put that into where they ask for a search, this program is called All Earth is Hopeful.
Oh,
and
nice.
My colleagues and I had pretty much planned what we thought would be the 2020 Christmas Festival with another theme and another focus. At that time, we believed this would be Steve Amundsen's final year as conductor of the orchestra. He's celebrating. This would have been his 40th Christmas Festival. He was a baby when he came here. He was 26. He may return for one more year to at least conduct the orchestra. He hasn't told us for sure. I have been on my hands and knees several times begging him to make that decision. But when I brought my colleagues together again as an artistic committee, and that artistic committee is comprised of the 5 conductors and our college pastor and our visual designer, Christy Hawkins, our college pastor, Matt Marole, I said, we can't use, I don't want to use this same thing, and I think we need to think more intentionally about the theme and what we want to focus on. And as we examine not only COVID-19, that meeting I held with those colleagues was about 2 weeks after George Floyd's murder.
Mm-hmm.
And we could start to see what the November election was going to look like.
Right.
Because by that point, it looked like former Vice President Biden would be the Democratic nominee against the current occupant of the White House. And so we knew that there's going to be a lot of tension, a lot of angst,
mm-hmm.
and the need for hope in this world. There was a carol that we had done recently, the Latin American carol that my current colleague James Bob had arranged, Toda a la Tierra, All Earth is Hopeful. And we drew the theme from that. And so much of the music, as I curated this program with suggestions from my colleagues, was to bring back that message of hope, that message of love, that message of peace. And I think we've tried to, especially I think the best sense of 21st century Lutheranism, it is a much more inclusive than exclusive approach to understanding God. And that's what we've tried to do in this program, is to show, I think, the the much more global. I would use the term much more rainbow color of God's creation and God's people. So you see maybe a few more of my selections come from not only musical compositions by African American composers, but also texts by African writers. One piece in particular was a work that we premiered in 2018 with the St. Olaf Choir and members of the St. Olaf Orchestra by Norwegian composer Kim André Arnesen, called I Would Like Candles This Christmas Time. But he uses the text of a Black theologian and civil rights activist, Howard Thurman. And it's a powerful piece. So I think it's been, I hope, a good smorgasbord of what we've done and shown the evolution of St. Olaf in many ways as a community.
Well, that's beautiful. And I encourage everybody out there to go there and watch the stunning program that you put together. I want to say that this episode's a little bit different than most episodes. There's going to be more songs, and it's my Christmas doubleheader. I had Steve Amundsen on last week, who is the director of the St. Olaf Orchestra. And we played some songs and talked to him for a while. And now today, we are so honored to have you, Anton Armstrong. And so let's just jump in here, dig into this first song called I Saw Three Ships, and arranged by Carolyn Jennings, my mother-in-law. And this was from the PBS Christmas program done in 2013 called Christmas in Norway with the St. Olaf Choir.
Carolyn has many works, but your mother-in-law has a talent that there's never a bummer that comes off her pen. They're little jewels. So, but I wanted something of hers on this piece, and she has several carols that I love. But I love this I Saw Three Ships. So we did this, and if you could see the kids' faces on this, they were just beaming. And, you know, we had done it the previous Christmas, so it was in their repertoire, but I basically put it away for 6 months. And pulling it out again was like seeing an old friend. And they sang with such joy and such exuberance. And I hope that comes through in the performance.
Well, that's a perfect setup. Let's take a listen to Carolyn Jennings' arrangement of I Saw Three Ships.
I saw three ships come sailing in on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. I saw three ships come sailing in on Christmas Day in the morning.
And what was in those ships so free on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day? And what was in those ships so free on Christmas Day in the morning? Our Lord and King it was indeed on Christmas Day, on Christmas Day. Our Lord and King it was indeed on Christmas Day in the morning.
Listening to Musician Talk, hosted by me, Pauline Jennings. My guest today in this extended Christmas interview is Dr. Anton Armstrong, conductor of the St. Olaf Choir and artistic director of the St. Olaf Christmas Festival. The piece you just heard, I Saw Three Ships, was performed by the 2013 St. Olaf Choir, conducted by my guest and arranged by Carolyn Jennings. You know, I love the layering in this piece. I just feel like there's so many surprises throughout the whole piece that is delightful. It's like taking an exciting journey.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what is the connection between PBS and the St. Olaf Christmas Festival?
In many ways, St. Olaf set a new pattern. It was a pioneer, as it has often been in so many ways,
Right.
Especially with the St. Olaf Choir. But when I was a student in 1975, the first collaboration between St. Olaf College, and it initially started with Twin Cities Public Television, when they came down and they wanted to videotape our Christmas festival to be shown, I think, more regionally. I don't think it was a national broadcast. That was also at the time when we were embarking on the bicentennial of the USA, and so a lot of our music that year had a more American flavor. It was wonderful. And I was a singer in the chapel choir, and as I reviewed that DVD, now they put that thing on DVD for me, but as I reviewed it, I even found myself in the chapel choir with big hair and about 40 pounds lighter. I may mention him more than once, and I think I have, but when you look at St. Olaf College and you look at some of the progressive moves that we made in not only the music we've done, but how we shared this message outside of the St. Olaf community, great credit has to be given to Robert Johnson. And in the early 80s, he tried to reestablish those connections with PBS. He knew about the 1975 program. And so in 1983, they did a magnificent program. If you compare the 75 program to the 83, it's like literally night and day. Well, they transformed Skoglund Center. And it was called What Child Is This? And this program went nationally. And no other college, no other organization, not even the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, as it was known at that time, was doing anything like this. And that really put St. Olaf on the map in another way. And it really connected people of that time to the wonderful traditions at St. Olaf. And that production led to another one in 1989 called Go Tell It on the Mountain. That was a memorable one because it was the final one that Kenneth Jennings would serve as artistic director of the festival. He had been involved as a faculty member since 1953. He first came back to conduct initially the Manitou Singers, and then the chapel choir. And then in 1968, he was named successor to Olaf Christmas to serve as the third conductor of the St. Olaf Choir. But again, it was a marvelous musical festival. I arrived in 1990, and VG was able pretty much to get us on a 4-year cycle of filming. By the time of the 90s and into this century, the St. Olaf Christmas Festival has become one of those hallmarks for so many families. I was sitting on a plane one time, and this gentleman kept staring at me. It was really kind of odd. And finally, he must have been on a flight where we got a meal, and we were eating, and finally he looks at me and he goes, "I know who you are." And I go, "What?" "Yeah, you're that guy in that Christmas program my wife makes me watch every year with our kids." You know, and he couldn't remember. He said, "You look a lot different." Well, in that program, I'm usually in a tuxedo, right? And I was in a pair of jeans and a hoodie, I think, on this flight. But that's what it, you know, and he said, we're not necessarily religious people, but it's one of the few things you can watch at Christmas time that seems to have some meaning and value.
Yes.
And so thanks a lot. So that's what that program has become. And so we were pretty much in every 4-year cycle that went until 2005. And 2005 would have been a normal year to record. But that was the year the St. Olaf Choir went to Norway. We actually went with the St. Olaf Band and St. Olaf Orchestra. It was celebrating the 100th year of the, as Norwegians put it, their peaceful separation from Sweden. But we went over as kind of American ambassadors for that. And the St. Olaf Choir stayed, our final concert was up in Trondheim at the National Church, the Nidaros Cathedral. Beautiful. It's the oldest, I think, Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. And we did this program and collaborated with the Nidaros Cathedral Girls Choir. And that program was a collaboration of PBS and NRK, the Norwegian National Television Broadcasting System. And it was a great success. In 2007, we came back to record, again, the St. Olaf Christmas Festival in Northfield. We did it again in 2011 when it was the centennial celebration of that festival's founding. And then in 2013, the St. Olaf Choir was back in Norway again for another tour, and we were able to create another television program, this time pretty much produced by St. Olaf and PBS, but it was a fabulous production, so much so that we won 2 Regional Emmy Awards for that production.
I saw that. I had no idea. Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yeah. I'm looking at the Emmy right now on my
Nice. So how do students get a spot on the St. Olaf Choir? Is it an audition?
It's a very rigorous audition.
I bet.
Having gone through it myself as a student. and honestly, the first time I auditioned at the first time. You hear it was more than one. At the end of my freshman year. And I was a strong student, but he had a lot of baritones auditioning, he being Kenneth Jennings.
Yeah.
And he got down, but he said, well, there are some things you need to work on. I'm going to make you an alternate, which means that you work on these things hopefully over the summer, and then you would come back to sing for the conductor. I still practice this way of doing things. And he was a sabbatical that year. So he had come back to campus to run the auditions. We were still in the old Steenland Hall to do those auditions. And the thing that made it hard was that my college roommate was still one of my best friends. But he got in and I didn't. And we were going to be roommates the next year. We were not roommates. We knew each other. We sat by each other, right by each other in chapel choir as freshmen. But he got into the same choir, I didn't. That's the year I found out how really wonderful a man Ralph Johnson is. Because I was in a little SOB that year. You know, there were a lot of things. I was dating a person and we moved into the same dormitory, same residence hall. And about 6 weeks in, she decided she was going to break it off with me. She started dating somebody in our same hall, and I'd see them all together, and they did too much PDA for my taste, you know. And Ralph always had these girlfriends constantly coming in the room and crying about something. You know, I just was not always the nicest roommate, and yet he stayed my friend. And 46 years later, I can say he's still one of my closest and dearest friends.
That's sweet.
But anyway, Ken was on sabbatical leave, and at that point, I think he was down at Florida State, actually, doing some research and study. And he was very kind. He wrote, and somewhere I still have the handwritten letter he wrote to me. These days, I at least can do an email. But if they ask, what can they work on? I tell them, because Kenneth did that for me.
Nice.
You know?
Yep.
So I worked on this. I had a wonderful voice teacher from Long Island I'd sung with in high school. And he worked so hard, and I came back, and I came in to sing for Dr. Jennings. And we were still in the old music building. He had this huge suite that the Chris Johnsons had had before him. And he finished, and he did some things, and he said, oh, you've really cleared up those problems beautifully. It's too bad you didn't sound like this in May. And I'm going, too bad. I'm going like, well, if I play, this is all in my head.
Right.
Too bad. And he goes, well, I've had a transfer student from Concordia, and he's a good low second bass. And I need another second bass more than I need another baritone. So you just stay in chapel choir for one more year. It'll do you good. Now, I've often said, if I had practiced voodoo, there have been a lot of pins in the doll for your father-in-law. But, you know, it was a hard year in the beginning, but I learned a good lesson in life about, you know, you're not always succeeding. And what do you do when you don't succeed? That's one of my little gripes about our current generation of young people. They feel entitled to so many things sometimes. And we have wonderful students, but that sense of entitlement and lack of gratitude. And I almost left St. Olaf. I had papers, I did transfer papers to go to Oberlin because one of my best friends was at Oberlin. He said, come here. And I decided I just needed to get away from St. Olaf. So I took an interim called Perspectives on Teaching. And basically you sat in and you interned and shadowed a teacher. So I shadowed 2 different teachers, including this man who had done my voice study. He taught at a Waldorf school, not too far from my home. And then our director of music at my home church in Long Island was head of choral studies at a public school. So I had both a private school and public school experience. But at the same point, during that break, St. Olaf Choir came to New York. And that was one of the other reasons I'd wanted to be in the choir, because we were coming back to my home. But I got to go in, I heard the concert, it was fabulous. I got to see friends, and it was kind of my way of saying, don't quit. You stay at St. Olaf and try harder. And we got to that spring. Ken had a way of going around, and the students then and students now create more drama than need to be created. You know, but he you do a general round of auditions, and then he brings, and I still do the same, I bring then the finalists for a recall audition, where I listen to them and trying to fill in the holes with returning members of the section. And there was a wonderful young man who had transferred to St. Olaf. His name was Robert Smith. He later was a voice professor here for over 20 years. Bob had this velvety voice. It was just gorgeous. And while we're not at the exact same timbre, but somehow when we sang together, we sounded like one voice.
Oh, neat.
And that's, of course, what Kenneth was looking for. It's what I look for to some degree. And he, at one point, had us do these patterns, and then he said, sing together. And I said, well, we did.
Oh.
And he left us alone. And so for the rest of the audition, which went on for like another 40 minutes, I don't know if you can see my finger, but he would take his little finger and he would take it on your shoulder. And he said, I'll take you. And you always would sit there and go, please touch me, please touch me. And Bob and I were the 2 he touched. So, beautiful. You know, and what that taught me, I'll tell you now, is that every year when we get to spring and I have to do those recall auditions, and I can't always take everybody. Right. I know how that feels. I kind of relived that, you know, April 1875 all over again. But it also, I think, allows me to try to do it in such a way that hopefully, you know, they don't feel like they're being destroyed as people. You know, it gave me a little more empathy, and I grew from that. And and I'm always grateful. So yeah, it is a rigorous audition. In the same way that my predecessors had, at least I know the way Kenneth did it, is that you listen to everyone who wants to sign up. So I do about 18 hours of auditions in the spring, listening to everyone. Wow. Sometimes I think some people's self-assessment skills are not too good, and you just have to sit there. And then you get the kid who comes in and sometimes doesn't really give a rip, but just thought they would try it for the spur, and you find this incredible human being, Right. And I'm listening for the voice, but I learned a lot of things from Kenneth musically. I really did. But he was also, I think, a good judge of human beings. In the end, I made an experiment my second year. I picked the very best voices that I could pick. Mm-hmm. It was the worst year I've ever had in 30 years. Because I had too much drama, too much divas. It's a balance of beautiful voice, good musicianship, but a humble spirit.
Right.
Here's one of the stories I'm going to tell about your father-in-law. It was my first year in the choir, and we were doing for Christmas Little Drummer Boy, Mm-hmm. And I had sung that piece as a child and blah, 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 blah. And, especially if you're a tenor or bass, you don't have a very interesting part. All you're singing is brum, 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 piddly, piddly, brum. So we were a pretty good choir. But we were going through this, and the other thing, at least in my time knowing, Kenneth never raised his voice. Mm-hmm. He never yelled, he never raised his voice. But we got through it, and it was like we were going to sing this in the most crappy fashion in the world, and maybe, if I ever saw an ensemble passive-aggressive behavior, that was that. It was like, piece is below us, I mean, that's kind of what was going through my brain. He finishes the piece, and we kind of know excuse my language, we sucked. And he kind of just looked at us, and he came in close to the choir because he was soft-spoken, And he came in, and basically, as I remember this, and I've shared this with other people in the room, they said, "Yep, that's right." He said, people, you still don't get the message. Mm. He said, all this little boy had was this piddly little drum, but he played it the best. He used all of his talent, and he gave it as a gift to his baby. And look at you, we're here in this beautiful school, in this beautiful place. And when you leave here, you will have food to fill your stomach. And you have a safe place to sleep. I've always remembered that and I remember it now, especially when I deal sometimes with students who feel entitled. What he taught me was a great gift musically about gratitude. Mm-hmm. A great gift about gratitude. And I've done that piece once or twice. I think on the second program in 2013, I used it on the Norway program. We did it for Olaf Christmas, but I told them that story. They said, yes. I understand basses and tenors. I also, as a boy, I was in a professional boy choir, American Boychoir, and I had to sing, and I was an alto, so I was singing the same piddly, piddly plums, But I said, this is what you have, and sometimes you're not always going to be the star.
Right.
But the gift you give, you never know who you will touch.
Right.
And so that was one of the great lessons that I learned about life from him.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's a great segue because this next piece is written by Ken Jennings. And so will you set this up for us? It has the text of a little town of Bethlehem, but it's his piece.
Yes, it uses the text. Now, I first heard this my freshman year at St. Olaf, sitting in the mass choir, singing the chapel choir, but it was done by the Manitou Singers when I first heard it. Well, originally, Ken's first ensemble that he conducted when he came to St. Olaf in 1953 was the Manitou Singers. He had that group for 1 year, and then he was assigned the chapel choir. And he wrote that for the Manitou Singers. I think he may have written it for that first year. There's actually a middle section that he never, when he transcribed it for SATB, I would assume that he transcribed it for chapel choir, when he had chapel choir. But he left me a score of this. It's not his score. It's Olaf Christmas's score, where Olaf re-edited certain things. I later showed it to Ken, and he goes, "Oh, that's right. Olaf liked to do that to a lot of people's music, But I remember hearing this, and Alice Larson was then the conductor of the Manitou Singers, and Manitou Singers has always been just a beautiful sounding group under all of its conductors, but especially under Alice, she was able to get this incredible maturity of sound out of these 18 to 19-year-old young women. And I always fell in love with the piece. And then my junior year, this same college roommate, Ralph Johnson, had a church position right up the road here, Highview Christiana Lutheran Church. And he was a brave soul, maybe a little silly, but he took this piece, which looks easy note-wise, but it isn't. You have to come out of the heavens, really, to sing this first note. Kenneth was a consummate musician, always as a conductor, but always also as a composer. His teaching and raising a family kept him so busy. He did do a lot of writing when he was actively teaching. He did much more, in those last 30 years after he retired. But this one, it just shows an efficiency of style, the beautiful harmonies, and you get one or two melodies for a little town, and you hear this beautiful melody, so tender and so beautiful. And it's one of my favorite pieces. I have that piece and another piece he wrote later in his life, The Lord is the Everlasting God. For sure, when I decided it will be my last year, the little town of Bethlehem will be on that Christmas program.
Oh, lovely.
And on my last tour program, The Lord is the Everlasting God will be on that last tour program. That time's coming soon, but not yet. When you have a tune, in a way, you get a certain image. And I think what Ken's composition did was to reawaken and allow me to see these words in new light. And I know I did it last in 2015. I just could not get a hold of that recording. But 5 years before that, I finally got to go to the Holy Land. And I was there to do a choral workshop for Hallel, which is like their national choral organization. And when they initially extended the invitation, I said to somebody at a gathering of international choral conductors, they said, "We'd like you to come to Israel." I said, "I'd love to come to Israel." And they said, "Well, we really would love to have you come at Christmas, but every time we invite Americans, they can never come because you always have these Christmas programs." I said, "Well, when do you want me to come?" And she said, "Well, actually, we'd love for you to come December 16th through December 21st. I said, "Well, in my case, my Christmas program is done early in the semester, and by that point, I will have done my finals.
Nice.
So I can come." So I did, and I started off in Tel Aviv, and I got to go to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum there. But the last day, my hosts were Israeli, and they took me, and basically started on the tourist tour of Jerusalem. So we started at what everything is what they think is the top of the Mount of Olives. We went to what they think is the Garden of Gethsemane.
Right.
Then I did the Via Dolorosa. I ended up at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, so the site of Golgotha. And then they turned me over to some Arab friends of theirs, Palestinians, who then took me into the Arab quarter for lunch. And then they took me to Bethlehem because the Palestinians have an easier time to get into Bethlehem than the Israelis do. And then 2.5 hours later, I'm sitting in the grotto where they believe is the birth of Christ, the birthplace for Christ.
Oh.
And then the Church of the Nativity in Shepherd's Field. And then they brought me back to Jerusalem, and I saw this program with children, both Arab and Israeli children, sharing music together. I remember saying to my host, if the children can do it, why can't the adults do it?
Right. Oh.
I got back to Northfield, I think, late on the 22nd, early in 23rd. And 24th, I'm sitting in my church here, Bethel Lutheran Church in Northfield, singing O Little Town of Bethlehem, with a whole new understanding.
Yes.
And I remember when I came back to do Ken's piece in 2015, all of a sudden I could see scenes very different, and I think the way I conducted that, but I think it's still evident in this performance from 2005. But he made me rethink that text and re-examine it. And so I wanted to share that with our listeners.
Let's take a listen to the composition written by Kenneth Jennings based on the text of O Little Town of Bethlehem. And here it is. This is Musician Talk, and you just heard Ken Jennings' original arrangement that uses text from O Little Town of Bethlehem, conducted by my guest, Dr. Anton Armstrong, and performed by the St. Olaf Choir. It is such an emotional song to listen to. The voices are so clear. The precision is just obvious when you listen to this song. It's just absolutely beautiful, astounding. I wonder what about this song, or what about a song makes that emotional connection? I mean, I know it's obviously the text and the beautiful chords, but there's something ineffable about it. Can you put your finger on it?
Well, I don't know if I can put my finger on it, but let me respond in this way. I think all music can do that, but I think the uniqueness of choral music is that it not only has beautiful melodies and harmonies, but it has to illustrate a wonderful text.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Kenneth did with this was to really paint a new palette of what O Little Town of Bethlehem could be.
Sure.
And I'm glad you can hear the precision, because while I never sang this under him, all of a sudden I would say, what would Kenneth do? Went through my head. And the crafting of line is very much, it's me, but it's influenced by him, because he had one of the greatest sense of line, legato in a musical phrase. And again, as I said, his hands just always demonstrated that. But I think it's that ability to really text paint, to bring out the beauty of the text so that music and text together have an impact on the senses. Now, I mean, music alone can do a lot, but when you combine music and text, and I think that is the singular gift that song brings to the listener and to the performer. One of the things that I remember reading that Olaf Christmas said years ago is that the search for excellence with the St. Olaf Choir, and I think it's been true, was true with his father, with Olaf, and certainly with Kenneth, and I've tried these 30 years to make that my goal, is that you can eliminate all those things that can distract the listener, so that if chords are out of tune, or there doesn't seem, if you start hearing voices that pop through, and when you can eliminate all those things, then I think the power of that text, the power of that music, and I think for people who are people of faith, I think the power of the Holy Spirit can come through.
Sure.
And that's always what I'm working for, to remove those distractions. And I think that's also one of the lessons I learned from Kenneth Jennings, and you let the music speak for itself as beautifully as it can.
Well, personally, I think that transcendent is a word too that comes to mind with choral music. I love music. I love a lot of types of music. I sing a lot of music, but that doesn't seem to happen with other kinds of music. But with that choral, when it's performed so precisely and beautifully, it has that way to take you outside of yourself.
I agree.
You not only have the precision in with your consonants and your vowels and your endings and your beginnings, and then there's also this cohesion with dynamics. And you really hear this in the next song, I think, in I Will Light the Candles This Christmas, written by Norwegian composer Kim Andre Arnesen and performed in 2018. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
good.
this was an interesting piece because I've done several of Kim's pieces. I was first introduced to his music by the Nidos Domenciente Choir, the Nidos Cathedral Girl Choir, when they did another of his pieces called Even When He Is Silent. And I heard it and I was stunned by it. But of course, it was written for SSAA voices, and their conductor, Anita Breivik, has been a longtime friend. We collaborated on these two television programs in 2005 and 2013. And I heard this at a World Symposium of Choral Music in Argentina in 2011. And she said, well, actually, he has an SATB version of that. And I got a hold of it. And next year I performed it on the tour, and we actually performed it in Norway in 2013, and he could be present at the concert. That's on YouTube, and that has had over 1 million hits.
Wow.
That performance. It's really gratifying. But I loved his music. And so after that, he actually surprised me in 2014 on my birthday with a nice email letter and then an attachment. And it was a piece he'd written in my honor for my birthday called Flight Song. And it is a stunning piece. And he's also written several other pieces that we have given premieres to. But this piece was initially a birthday present from Celia Ellington to her partner, Gary Amat. And it was a surprise for him. And they have long been supporters of Kim Andre Arneson, and both of these people still very much live up in the cities, and they have been great supporters of the arts. But Celia came to me and wanted to have Kim Andre write a piece for Christmas Festival. What we didn't know yet what the piece would be, what he would text, he would choose. He had written a piece the year before for me for Christmas time using a wonderful Welsh poet, Ewan Tate, who wrote also his flight song piece. But he said, I'm going in a different direction. And he sent me the piece, the choral parts with the text, and then he sent a fully orchestrated part. And I looked at the piece and it's gorgeous, but I thought to do justice to this, and we had pretty much picked already the rest of our mass choir pieces. I said, I just don't want to take the chance because I think this piece needs more rehearsal than I can adequately give it to the mass choir. So I said, I'll do this as a St. Olaf choir because I know I can get I can get the nuance that I want. But you're going to have, we can't sing over the full orchestration. So he recreated a chamber version of this piece for strings and oboe. And actually, we toured Norway the following June, and we used this piece, so he got to hear it again when we sang it in Oslo at the New Opera House, and the King Harald of the Fifth of Norway was present for that performance, and then Kim got to hear it up at the Nidaros Cathedral. But what I love about this is it's a beautiful melody, beautiful piece, but it's the text. And he said, I didn't do it accidentally, Anton, knowing that you would be at the helm of this. He chose one of the great African-American theologians and civil rights leaders, Howard Thurman. And this piece will appear on the digital program that we are sharing this Christmas. But it is very much a work that shares, I think, the real message of Christmas. And if I can just take the time quickly to read the text for your listeners.
Please do.
I will light candles this Christmas, candles of joy despite all sadness, candles of hope where despair keeps watch, candles of courage for fears ever present. My God, does that not speak to us now in 2020 with everything?
Yes.
The second verse goes on, candles of peace for tempest-tossed days, candles of grace to ease heavy burdens, candles of love to inspire all my living, candles that will burn all year long. But here's the heart of the message that just grabs me. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins to find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nation, to bring peace among others, to make music in the heart.
Wow.
Just lifted it up and gave it new life.
Wow. I'm speechless. Let's listen to this wonderful, wonderful message and beautiful, beautiful performance.
Candles
This is Pauline Jennings with Musician Talk. You just heard Kim Andre Arneson's piece called I Will Light the Candles This Christmas, performed by the St. Olaf Choir, conducted by my guest, Dr. Anton Armstrong. Wow. When those sopranos pop up, it just soars. It's so beautiful. The whole song soars. It's really incredible. And special shout out to Julia Porter, who's plays the terrific oboe riffs on this.
It's a beautiful work.
You know, I watched a performance of this on YouTube and noticed that the students are swaying. And I've noticed this other times too with your choir. About 100 years ago, when I was in high school choir, we were told you do not move, basically. You just move your mouth, right? Well, I mean, I've learned a lot about this since Steve has played the gospel church up in Minneapolis with gospel choirs, and they move, and I move, and I always had a hard time with that. So tell me a little bit about that.
When I was in St. Olaf Choir under Olaf Johnson, he said, plant your feet and stand still. And that's what we did when I sang the St. Olaf Choir. But your father-in-law danced. He danced on that podium, you know?
Yes.
And so part of this came when in 1998, I went to work at the Oregon Bach Festival, and this is a high school program, which still is very much going. Hopefully we will regain our work after this year of COVID-19. But one of the people that I was introduced to and has been with me all those years, and now is my colleague at Olaf College, is Dr. Therese Hibbert. And Therese teaches, she teaches voice, conducting, and direct manico singers and the chamber singers. But she has cultivated a way of knowing music that she calls body singing. Mm-hmm. And what it is for music educators who might be listening, yes, it has some forms of Emile Dalcroze, rhythmics and everything. But basically she's saying, let the body feel as a whole being. And I don't force it on the kids. But what I did say is, rather than standing there like if something stuck up your backside, I said, let your bodies feel. And they do. And I have had my complaints. Every year I get at least one or two complaints. But, you know, in 2001, I had the joy of conducting and the honor of conducting the World Youth Choir down in Argentina. We had 84 singers from 46 different countries. But we did our training in Caracas and in Merida. And I still remember going to a concert of early Renaissance music by Spanish and Latin composers. I remember at one point they were doing music by Vittoria and Gesualdo. And they were moving. They didn't stand still. And when you look at people, whether you look at Yo-Yo Ma, whether you look at Joshua Bell, you look at Jean-Pierre Rampal, they don't sit still. They're moving, their bodies are expressing. And the tradition that we have continued, I don't know after COVID-19 if we can do this, but the tradition the choir has had for years is that they hold hands. Mm-hmm. And the problem is when they hold hands and they start to move without colliding, they have to start to feel how they move together. And they do. And it's funny because if you look very carefully, for instance, there are times at Christmas Festival, they don't hold hands in the mass choir, and they're very still. It's when they hold hands, and their bodies are gently moving, even in those mass choir pieces. But when they start to hold hands, you're much more aware of it. But I will tell you, on a 2-week tour, they have come back I would say these last 21, 22 years, since I've said, release your bodies. They come back less exhausted. They're still exhausted, but less exhausted. The tuning of the choir has been so much better because their bodies are not so rigid and they're engaged. And when somebody really comes after me, because they will use my own words against me, eliminate distraction. But if you close your eyes and listen to the music.
Yes. It actually helps me.
I think that it's more of a generational thing, quite honestly.
Sure.
I think I find the feedback from that comes more from people, I would say 50 and over, Mm-hmm. Younger generations actually love it. I think people who are willing to be more open-minded who are 50 and over enjoy it as well.
Exactly.
So I've learned not to even sit there and apologize. I accept it. And my one thing is shut your eyes.
Perfect. It totally makes sense to me because singing isn't static. Holding hands and moving together, you become this one entity, even more so than just with your voice. I love it.
For me, this is also influenced by a woman who was a great mentor of mine. Her name was Helen Kemp. She was for many years a professor of music and voice, church music and voice at Westminster Choir College in Princeton, New Jersey. For her mantra, she worked with children all of her life. She died 3 days after Kenneth did, and their funeral services were back to back. So literally, this is why I ran out of the reception. If you remember, I was kind of emceeing that reception.
Yes.
And I had to leave because I had to catch a flight to New Jersey because I was giving her eulogy the next day. It was a really hard weekend on me. But she had a mantra. She lived to be 97, and her mind was sharp to the end. But her mantra was body, mind, spirit, voice. It takes the whole person to sing and rejoice. And that's part of also that fed into my saying to the ensemble choir, let your bodies sing. That's what I say to them. Yeah, so I just think that it's a powerful thing when all of them is involved in a way. So take that for what it's worth.
Got it. I agree. I can't sing without moving. The last song we're going to hear today is called The Virgin Mary Had a Baby Boy. And this is from the centennial celebration of the Christmas Festival in 2011, entitled Rejoice, Give Thanks, and Sing. This was a commissioned piece. Who was the composer and what was it commissioned for? Was there a specific reason it was commissioned?
Well, as I think I've mentioned a couple of times, one of my dearest friends and longest knowing friends of 42 years now is Dr. Andre Thomas, who's one of the most respected conductors in this country and literally in the world. He and I were one of 3 African-American students in the graduate conducting program when I went to University of Illinois to work on my master's in 1978, and he was starting his doctoral studies. He went on to wonderful careers at University of Texas for 3 years, and then he spent 34 years at Florida State University, where he was also the director of choral activities. But he's an incredible musician, fabulous pianist, whether you're dealing with classical art music, jazz, or especially gospel music. Nobody can play it like Andre. And I mentioned him earlier when the piece that Olaf Choir gave to me as a gift, this virtual piece they gave to me. Andre has been one that I've often turned to when I want music out of the African-American experience, especially out of the spiritual. And when I told him that we were commissioning him to write a piece, I said, I'd like to bring a flavor of myself to the St. Olaf Christmas Festival. But he understands, as some of your listeners may know, that my parentage is from the Caribbean. My father was born and raised in Antigua in the British West Indies, and he came to the U.S. when he was 18, in the middle of the Depression. My mother was, though born in Harlem, she spent a lot of her childhood back in her family's home, which was in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. They met as teenagers soon after my dad came to this country. And so Andre really wanted to maybe not write another arrangement of a spiritual, but he wanted to bring at least part of me into this. And unlike my 3 predecessors, I'm not a gifted composer, so I've leaned on the talents of friends. And so he wrote this piece, and part of it was that he said, I wanted to bring a carol from the Caribbean. I wanted to use instruments that would be native to that. So you hear a steel drum in this performance. And he's captured the flavor of it, but you hear all of a sudden, right in the middle, We 3 Kings of Orient are. He just gets a smidgen of it in the middle of that. But it's so clever and in this very concise composition. And again, I had a fabulous pianist at the time, Andrew Burgoyne, who's now gone on to a career conducting musical theater and lyric opera on the East Coast.
Wow.
And he was at the piano, and a student in the choir at the time was playing steel drum, and the other choir students were playing the rest of the percussion. But it's just a piece that I love. I love that he captured part of who I am and part of my heritage that I could bring in and weave into this tapestry of the St. Olaf Christmas Festival.
That's wonderful. And it's upbeat, it's joyful, and it's a wonderful song to end with. So let's take a listen to Andre Thomas's song called The Virgin Mary Had a Baby Boy, conducted by Dr. Anton Armstrong, my guest today, and performed by the St. Olaf Choir. joy. Like I said, it's a terrific way to end this very special musician talk. I just want to thank you so very much for joining me today and walking us through some of these beautiful Christmas choral pieces and telling us about your life and some of your adventures and your journeys. It was just very exciting and fun. Thank you.
Well, Pauline, this really has been a delight. I've seen you from a distance, but we've never gotten a chance to talk.
We haven't.
And now I know why Steve married you.
Thank you. That is sweet. That's
and
sweet.
happy holidays to all of you. A blessed Christmas, and I hope a new year for all of us is filled with better health and more peace and more harmony.
Exactly. Thank you so much. Take care. What a great joy it was for me to have this extended conversation with Dr. Armstrong. So very many thanks to him and to all of you out there tuning into Musician Talk on KYMN. Happy holidays to all and have a terrific day.